morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, everybody, and thank you so much for joining us today for another adventure with FC Live. And I'm joined here today by Ajay Kamat.
Yeah. Hi, everyone.
And we're really lucky to have him here with us today. I'm really looking forward also to all of your questions. As a reminder to the audience today, feel free to ask questions in the comments section below. So just if you want to ask a question, just type it out as a comment, and our team will surface it to a live screen we have here in the studio, and we'll get you your answers. And it'll be a great conversation. These are always a lot of fun, and I'm really looking forward to chatting more. But before we go to questions, I just wanted to chat a little bit and get to know Ajay, your story a little bit.
Sure.
I guess just to run the clock quite a bit backwards, I noticed that you actually had your start in biology. Is that right? Like biology and engineering. You were
it was interesting.
UC, one of the
UC Davis.
UC Davis.
Yeah, I studied bioengineering. I loved the science, and taking the classes and all and learning about it all was a ton of fun. And when I went into industry, I started doing some internships. I realized that it was just so slow. And discovering drugs and cures for things was just like 10, 20, 30 years, and it just wasn't for me. And it was really solitary too. I literally wore a lab coat and was doing experiments all day. Pipetting nonstop. And after doing that for a couple of years, I decided I have to go into technology.
Got it. And so how did that transition happen? Because I'm sure there's some sort of a story there in terms of going from the lab pipetting in a lab coat to starting, I believe you started a company right after that, or?
Yeah. So that was I was working in biotech when I was in college, and after graduating college, I was determined to go get into software, and it wasn't easy because my background was in bioengineering. I wasn't a software engineer.
Right.
And so I got a job right out of school that was in a technology company, but it was more in a sales and BD type of role. But I told myself as soon as I saved up enough money to quit that I would, and I would start a company, because I kind of came to the conclusion that the only way that I was going to be able to get into the industry that I wanted to was to dive in head first.
Yeah.
And so that's what I ended up doing.
So it was like sort of a simultaneous realization or decision to not just go into software, but also, or technology, but also start a company.
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting time. Like, I was really fortunate. I grew up in the Bay Area, just across the street from Apple, and software and technology companies were all around me. And I thought that I wanted to go into biotech, but once I crossed that off the list as something that I didn't want to do, I was very confident that what I wanted to do was get into software. And so, and it's not easy to get a job. And so one of the things that I realized that I had to do is just learn. And the way to learn was to just start experimenting and doing it on my own.
Sure. What was an early lesson? Because I know I want to talk about the wedding company that you started later, but I think you started a messaging company initially. Yeah. What maybe briefly describe the company, and then also what was one or two lessons that you learned from that experience? Because it sounds like whatever came out of that, you're ready to just jump right in and do it again.
Yeah.
So I'm curious.
So we started a company called Micromobs, and Micromobs was a group messaging product. So if you can think of what Facebook Groups is now. At the time, Facebook Groups didn't exist. WhatsApp, all these messaging products didn't exist. And we launched it. We got on TechCrunch. We got a lot of press, and we ended up getting something like 50,000 users, and it wasn't really growing, and so we decided to shut it down.
Yeah.
The big lesson there for us was, one, we just weren't really the right people to build that product. We didn't know how to develop on mobile. It was our first kind of time doing something on the web, and we built this clunky product. It was a little slow, and we couldn't get a lot of people. It didn't resonate with a lot of people, and at the same time, all of these awesome mobile messaging apps were coming out, and those were becoming really popular, and it was just we were just off, and we weren't building the right thing.
Yeah. Do you remember, I don't want to drill too much on this point, but I think this is something that perhaps some of the entrepreneurs in the audience might take learning and lessons from, is that obviously takes a lot of self-awareness and introspection to make that call.
Yeah.
It sounds like you were looking at the data and just decided based on what you were seeing that there's always this trade-off between never giving up, just always going at it, versus actually being real and being wait a second, maybe we should just pull the plug here because of X, Y, or Z reasons.
Yeah.
Any advice for founders making at that fork in the road?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing that I'll say is I didn't do it very well. So it actually I went too long, and I wish we had pivoted and shut that product down a little bit earlier. Right. But the one thing I'll say is just be highly skeptical of what you're producing. Like, you should have some intuition about the users that are using your product, and really put the data together to understand if people are using it or not, right? It's actually not super difficult now to get the data infrastructure in place to say, like, if someone signs up on day 1, are they using it on day 30, day 90? Are they really getting value out of the product or not? That's actually not super difficult to figure out within like a 6-month period.
Right.
But we went like 20 months when we should have probably been like 12 months.
I like that, at least the soundbite of like, be skeptical of your own.
Totally.
Of your own,
especially if it's in consumer products.
Yeah.
Like in consumer is so competitive and so challenging. You should be really thoughtful about, do people really like it or not?
Sure. So I'm going to take a quick moment to remind the audience there. Ajay's got awesome insight. Just if you have any questions, remember you can comment below in the comment section. So go ahead and do that. So what caused you to? I don't think I see. Is that nope? Yes. Okay. Perhaps the wedding ring explains. But like, what caused you to then go and start a wedding company?
Yeah.
And also maybe explain the company and like the gist of it, like what problem you were addressing.
Yeah. So in 2012, my co-founders and I started a company called Wedding Party, and Wedding Party was a group photo sharing product for weddings. It was a photo sharing product, a messaging product, and ultimately we were trying to build a marketplace around weddings. The reason that we decided to build it, so I wasn't married at the time. I actually got married in December of this last year. Yeah. Thanks. But the reason that we were thinking about this market at all is because my first friends started getting engaged and started getting married. Right. And there was this like domino effect where one friend got engaged and then another. And one thing that I realized is that 100% of them, every single one of them, complained about their wedding, and the plan, like they loved it, but the planning of it was just this really difficult thing. And so, because we were in this like period where we were investigating what we wanted to do next, we just started taking a look at the wedding market, and we noticed a couple of really interesting things. In the U.S., the number of people getting married was consistent every year. It's like 2.2 to 2.5 million people, million couples, and roughly $100 billion is spent on weddings every year. And it was highly fragmented. It was fragmented across hundreds of thousands of different wedding vendors, of which $50 billion is spent. $30 billion was spent on wedding gifts, and $11 billion on photography, and on and on and on. And we just looked at it and we said, why are there no products to help people with this difficult time when they're doing all this planning? And why isn't there a product that helps connect people to all of the like hundreds of thousands of potential vendors that they could be working with? And so we kind of set out to go try to solve that problem.
Got it. Cool. So like I'm taking you through like the chronology of the last 6 years, but just to kind of accelerate that a little bit, actually kind of a random small world scenario. It turns out that Instacart acquired this business. So acquired Ajay's last company, and as some people might be aware, Instacart's a FundersClub company, so sort of small world.
Yeah.
That's super cool. Oops. Yikes. Sorry, folks, if I just blew your eardrums out. Can I get an audio check? Are we? Okay, sorry guys. All right. So I guess now that you're, actually maybe we should explore, how did you then make that, so we sort of got the transition from pipetting in the lab to startups, and from kind of like a startup that maybe you saw eventually the writing on the wall, and maybe like figured out how to move beyond that to another opportunity. But what about getting into venture capital? Because it's a very different activity and endeavor from being a builder to being an investor. So I'm curious.
Yeah. So I didn't set out at all to go into venture capital. It wasn't really my plan. In fact, one of the things I identified most strongly with, and still identify with, is being an entrepreneur. I think starting something and building something from the ground up is one of the best things that someone can do. But I was fortunate with Wedding Party. We raised a bunch of money, and one of the firms that we were working with was Pear Ventures, at that point called Pejman Mar Ventures.
Right.
And so Pejman, one of the founders of the firm, was actually our first angel investor. And so after they started Pear, after he got together with Mar Hutchison, they started Pear. They invested in our company as well and joined our board. And so I'd been working with them for 4 or 5 years. And so after we sold the company, Pear was growing and they were raising a second fund, and we got to talking, and I decided to make the leap and do it. And I will say it was very controversial. I mean, I talked to as many people as I could, and it was like a very clear 50-50 split.
Right.
50% of people
the
said
advice
like,
you got,
yeah, people said like, stay in product, continue building, and other people said like, no, you should really go into venture capital and see what you can do there.
Right.
And for me, it was a very personal choice.
Yeah. Got it. Okay. Cool. So like having worn the VC hat, I guess, for about 1.5 years now or so. Yeah,
close to 2 years. Yeah.
What have you been able to borrow from being an entrepreneur, right? Starting 2 companies, right? Actually selling one, that you think makes you like a better VC, or that at least you've just found.
So I'm very open with founders and telling people that I would be a pretty bad like Series B growth stage investor. There's something about the stage that Pear operates at, which is like pre-seed and seed stage, that I think I understand really well. So in the 5 years that I was working on startups, 2 of those years I was bootstrapping and I was just paying everything out of pocket. Right. And 2 of those years we raised money. We built a team. Wedding Party actually got a ton of traction. We ended up getting 8% of all weddings annually in the US on our platform. Yeah. And so built a team, got a lot of traction, kind of took it through the whole process. And kind of having been through that, I'm very cognizant of what founders are going through when they walk in our door. And so we try to be super respectful. And on top of that, the one thing that I've learned is it actually took me 8 months straight of trying to fundraise to get my first round of funding together. And so what I try to do with founders is be as open and frank and honest as I can be about where we think their business is in order to save people time. Because that's the number one thing that I wish that I could get back, is like a little bit more time. And so I wish it took me 3 months instead of 8 months. And I feel like I could have gotten more done if that was the case.
The time spent fundraising, you mean?
Yeah.
So anything work against you a little bit in the sense of like things that you got used to as an entrepreneur, or habits or things that help as a founder, but maybe like hurt as an investor? Maybe not. I'm just curious on like, the converse.
I don't know. I mean, one of the things that really enticed me about Pear is that Pear itself is a startup. If it was really well established, I don't think that it would be a good fit for me. Sure. So being a founder, I think, was a prerequisite because of the work we do working with founders, but also I think because of building the firm itself as a startup exercise as well.
That's cool. I've heard so many stories about, for example, one of the co-founders of the firm, Pejman, actually an early backer of mine as well, and so sort of a small world again, but so many examples where he was like the first investor or really helped somebody through a tough spot or something like that. And it's cool to have him and Mar trying to build something different, right? And so that's cool. I totally get that. Cool. So audience, we're gonna like switch over to your questions now. And just if you're just tuning in or recently tuned in, a quick reminder that you can comment in the section below, and your questions will get surfaced by our team here, and they'll appear on the screen here. So yeah.
Can I add one more point on your question about being a founder and getting into venture? I do think it's also important that, like, our firm, we obsess over the first 24 months of a company's life cycle.
Yeah. And
so, like, who are the first 5 key critical hires? What is the operating strategy? What type of funding does the company actually need to like get to the milestones? We spend so much time thinking about that. That is one thing. Having done it now for several product launches personally, it's so beneficial to be able to go and help our founders think about those problems. Like, for example, I spend like 3-hour sessions with some of our portfolio companies just doing product road mapping. Because sometimes you just haven't done that formally as a team, and you get 3 or 4 people together and do it. And so that's the type of thing that we can really help companies with to get from like step 0 to step 1.
Sure, yeah, totally. I've been there, and as a founder, I mean, and sometimes these very focused but specific things that are just like so much help if you've never navigated that before.
Yeah.
It's really cool that you do that. Cool, so first question from Siri is from Siri. Can you talk about Pear VC and how you're building networks of young founders and potential founders and mentoring them to build businesses, or if you're doing that?
That is a lot of the work that we do. So as a pre-seed and seed stage firm, we're meeting people frequently when they're just at the idea stage of getting their companies off the ground. And in fact, sometimes we invest in teams that are just 2 or 3 people and an idea. And the way that we do that is I mean, the way that we get to know people is just that. We're actually quite liberal with our time, and we're willing to meet aspiring entrepreneurs. And one of the things we do is we really rely, we're a small team as a firm, but we rely on a lot of the community-related activities that we do. So last year we did something like 100 events, which is a lot for a very small firm. I mean, I think this last week we had 2 or 3 different events that we did. And these events are open to the public. So our portfolio companies come join, people that are friends of the firm join, and people who are interested in meeting us and learning more. And we do things like great speaker series where we bring top CEOs or top other types of founders who've built companies before. They come in and they talk. We do workshops. We do things like an annual food truck party where you know, all the friends of our community come together. And so on top of that, we do a lot of work with lots of different universities. And the whole goal is to get people into our network, part of our community, and we help people along.
How would for any founder out there, like you mentioned, they're open. Like how would a founder learn about these? Is it just on Pear's website?
Yeah, so go to our site pear.vc, and you can sign up for our mailing list there, and get into our list of events that we'll send out to everyone. I think it's a really excellent way of getting to know us. Some of the companies that we invest in, we learned later on that they had been coming to our events for like 6 or 9 months before we actually, you know, started learning more about their business and ultimately made an investment. So I think we're very open as a firm.
Cool, thanks. So next question is from Maria. For a company focused in VR, virtual reality, what are the problems that you think need to be solved in this space? And is there one area that you see as having more opportunity than others for a startup?
Well, the first thing that I'll say is our firm is not thematic. So we don't have like a deep expertise in any one category. Mm-hmm. We've looked at a lot of VR companies though, and I think, you know, the challenge is figuring out the application. These days, in fact, I've been much more excited about AR companies because it appears that there are more opportunities to build software that lots of people can use. I think Facebook's recent announcement is indication of that. I think there's a lot of gaming opportunities. When it comes to VR, I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is when is the big killer, like first killer game going to come out that gives the platform a lot of exposure to lots of people. And from there, ideally, we'll see this effect where people start building different types of applications that are valuable to different groups of people. But I don't think we've had that first inflection point yet. So that's at least what I'm personally waiting for.
Yeah, so that sounds like you personally think that maybe VR is a little early, whereas AR is maybe more closer to...
Yeah, I mean, I'm not one to like sit here and predict the future. That's just what I see in the companies that are coming to pitch us and what the technologies that people are building.
Got it. But you'd love to meet a VR founder that's
absolutely
actually found something. Okay, got it. Cool. All right, this question is from, sorry if I don't pronounce this correctly, Kunjaman in the audience. So, how do you see subscription box business models? So, like, typically these are e-commerce companies, right? I'm actually more explaining for the audience where you sign up and every month you get a box of something. It could be like socks, or it could be clothing, or it could be food or whatever. So that kind of.
Yeah, I think with e-commerce, one of the most important things for a brand is to be able to get people to have repeat purchases and keep coming back. And so subscription boxes are an interesting strategy to get people to kind of be sticky and stick with your brand for a long time.
It's like enforced stickiness.
Yeah, yeah. So that's exactly the problem, right? So the issue I think that is worth thinking about is how many pairs of socks, for example, does someone actually need? Like, are they buying a sock a month on average? And does what you're trying to sell them in the subscription box actually fit into like normal purchasing behavior that people would be comfortable with? Or are they more likely to test it out as an experiment and then churn off? So that's, I think, the issue. It's really about what are you selling? Do customers really want that over a long period of time? And if those two things are true, then it comes down to the economics. Like, how much does it cost you to acquire the products that you're putting in the boxes? Can you get any efficiencies of scale because of the model? And then it could potentially work.
Cool. Okay, so another audience question. What are the most important goals for a team, like a startup team, in their first 12 months?
Yeah, I mean, so it really depends on the type of company that you're building. Speaking from kind of a consumer or enterprise focus, you're really looking for product market fit, right? I mean, what you're looking to do is you're looking to build and launch a product and get some indication that people want to A, use your product, or B, customers want to pay for the product. And I think the first 12 months, if I were to start another company, that's exactly what I would focus on. I'd get a small, smart team together, focus on our core concept, launch a minimum viable product, like the least amount of engineering that we had to do, and see if we can get people to pay for it, or if it's in consumer product, pay for it, or stick with the product, have really high retention. And I think it could take a lot of iteration to get product market fit right. And so I would launch as soon as possible and then iterate as quickly as possible until you could find if people are willing to pay for your product or use your product. And I think that's all that the first phase of a company is about.
Sure. Yeah. I guess embedded in that answer for people, because there's an element of that I feel like affinity for from my past experience as well, where maybe I didn't do that in one of my last companies. But it sounds simple, but it's less about necessarily what your idea, what the perfect thing should be, and more about like reading the market and customer and user, right? And like iterating with them.
Yeah, I think there's this tendency, it's a natural tendency to want to build something that's like done, and then you launch it to people and you want them to start using it. But I think when it comes to building products, and even if you talk to people at larger companies, when they're launching new products, frequently they launch the minimum viable product feature set to the audience to see if people will start using it. And I think that's the most important thing to figure out.
Sure, cool. So another audience question. This is from Dylan, and maybe it's a little bit in the same bucket of what you're answering there. But Dylan says, if you had to start again from scratch with everything you know now, what would you do differently? Or the same, I guess. But yeah.
Okay, so one of the issues that we ultimately had with Wedding Party was actually the market. So earlier on, I said that $100 billion is spent on weddings every year. But the problem is that the customers are typically getting married once, in their lifetime, but you only have them for that very short period of time. And as a result, if you get the users, if you're so fortunate to be able to get users organically like we did, if they use your product and purchase through your product, within a year, they're going to be gone. If we had thought through that problem earlier before starting the company, I think we would have ended up in a different place with potentially a bigger company. So the two things that I think matter most when you're starting your company, and if I were to do it again, is to make sure I have just a killer team around me. Not a big killer team. It can be 2 or 3 people, but enough so that we could deal with everything. So one product person, 1 or 2 strong engineers, 1 designer, and get it really solid team together that can move very quickly, and then really think about the market and really think about how the market that you're going after actually functions today. Who are the existing players? How are the customers interacting with those existing players? Is there an opportunity to kind of get into any aspect of that market and then grow your business? And ultimately, can you have users that stick with your product for a long period of time? I think is very important.
Cool. Yeah, really insightful. So another audience question. This is from Chris. And by the way, if you're in the audience, I think we have time for, after this question, maybe one more question. So last chance to dive in. But Chris asks, my team and I have been building a company in the app streaming space, e.g. Google App Streaming. What do you think about this space? And would you be willing to give us some feedback on our deck? Thanks. So also, it's like sort of embedded in that is like, how would a founder, get in front of you with a deck also? But Chris is asking about the app streaming space, e.g. Google App Streaming.
I don't think I'm aware. I'm not sure I understand what app streaming specifically is. But I'll tell you this. So I'll talk about getting to us. So our jobs as investors are to meet awesome founders who are building cool stuff. So at least we are very accessible. So feel free to email me. It's ajay@pear.vc. But getting to investors, I think, is an interesting thing. I can tell a quick story about how I met my first investor, which is Pejman. Yeah. It was a rainy day in Palo Alto, and there was a block party that was supposed to be outdoors. It was supposed to be sunny, but it was raining, and I didn't want to go to the event. My co-founder said, look, just go. So I put on my wedding party t-shirt, and I went out and just kind of talked to a bunch of people. We were all huddling in this garage because it was rainy. And Pejman walked up to me and he said, hey, what's that? And he pointed at my t-shirt. And I told him what wedding party was. And he's like, huh, that's kind of interesting. Let's meet next week. And that ended up being our and then I actually went and met him in the rug gallery, which is an interesting story. But that's how we ultimately met. So I think, we're accessible. You can find us at events. You can email us directly. If you know people who know us, getting an intro is always a great way of getting in front of an investor. But yeah, I think being persistent really works.
And walking around with the shirt that says your company name on it.
Walking around with the shirt.
Palo Alto, at least.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, hey, this was a lot of fun. Thank you again, Ajay, for joining us. It was awesome hearing about your entrepreneurial journey and your venture capital role now, and a little insight into how Pear is building a VC firm. Takes things a little bit differently at space. I think you said pre-seed as well as seed stage, early stage. So super cool. And thank you to the audience for asking questions. It was great. Cool. So
thanks,
we'll catch you guys next time. Yeah. Thank you again.